there's somewhere in the middle of this nowhere that you're going to have to address.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot, and
it's our birthday! So this episode will be coming out on September 1st, which is my birthday, as well as and Elliot's birthday. Different years, but...
He hastens to add.
What? Did you think I was trying to point out that I'm exactly 10 years younger than you?
A decade younger? Yeah.
You're just 10 years wiser, Elliot.
Yes, I'm sure. That's what so many people say when looking at comparative photos. Wow, look how much wiser he looks.
Exactly. So anyway, happy birthday to us. Don't worry, you don't need to get us anything, but what you could do is tell a friend about the show. That is the best way that we grow our audience, which is probably the only thing, I'll just speak for both of us. I'm sure that's the only thing you and I, with everything else going on in the world, that is the only thing we care about, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you all. So here's my story. Last week I was on vacation. It was last week. I get confused. It's been 2 weeks since I've seen you, so I started to get confused there. But last week I was on vacation, and we went to this just lovely little cabin, little Airbnb cabin in the mountains outside of Asheville. And there were two things that the Airbnb description did not mention that I found really interesting for opposite reasons. So one of them, especially because you read the description of how to get there, and there's a gravel road and a mountain hill, and it's lots of switchbacks. You can go this way, but it's not ricketier, but it's very like you're on it's on a hillside, like it's an A-frame on the side of a hill. So you just
sound like an Indiana Jones movie.
Kind of, right? So it has a very sort of in the middle of nowhere sort of feel. And the look off the deck and the side of the mountain is just trees and valley and sunsets and fog in the valley crevices. I mean, just gorgeous. So we get there, and there absolutely is, like if you're standing on the deck and you're looking straight down, you are looking at the truly gravel road, like one of those gravel roads. It's really just two strips of like tires that are gravel kind of road that you had to take to get to the house. But directly in front of that, like 20 feet, perfectly parallel to said gravel little road, is the main mountain drag that you take up out of Asheville, called Town Mountain Road. That comes up out of Asheville. And this is a for real and very highly trafficked road that, because it's like a mountain, often you get like people coming by on motorcycles and big trucks and not a ton of traffic, but enough. And because of the way the valley is set, like it's not a small sound when you're on the deck when things do come by. Now, fortunately, people aren't constantly driving by, but it was, not so bad that it like ruined the trip or something. It's not like you couldn't focus. Like I played guitar on the deck quite a lot and it was fine. But it was like the teensiest bit annoying. And I thought, if they had just mentioned that and say, you're somewhat secluded, there is some road traffic noise, then I would have been prepared for it and probably wouldn't have, like, I don't think it would have kept me from renting that particular house, but I just would have known, and then it wouldn't have felt like a surprise. And it was fine. But so that was sort of just this, like, I think you'd be better off to have mentioned it than not mentioned it. And then here's the thing.
But you're talking about the art of managing expectations. But if you're reading, it's kind of like the dentist telling you this might pinch a little bit. If I hear that in advance, what I know is this is going to be about an 11 on a 1 to 10 scale of pain.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying like always mention it like 4 notches less. So if it's only a 3, it doesn't get mentioned.
Well, but what I'm saying is, if I'm reading an Airbnb advertisement and they say, "Oh, wonderful views, but there might be a little bit of traffic noise. I'm going to assume the cabin is in a median strip.
That's interesting.
I'm going to
I don't take it that way, I guess. Well, I guess that's why you're a lawyer and I am not.
Because with my legal background, what I'm thinking is, somebody thought that it's so bad they really could be sued unless they give some sort of disclosure.
Right. So it's like saying like the basement has a faint mold scent. You're like, oh my God, it's black mold on the walls and the ceiling.
People have died. Yes. That's exactly
Fair
right.
point. Okay. And you're right. Maybe I would, maybe, I mean, I can't know if I would have changed my mind if it said there is some road noise. What I would have appreciated was like a photo just so you could see, because everything else about this really, like if I showed you all the pictures, you'd be like, this is a cabin on the side of a hill with like nothing else around it. If I was looking straight down and saw that there was a main road, right, that would have just been enough of a perspective to know that like, I don't know. Like I said, it wasn't like a big distraction the whole week. So it really didn't rise to the occasion of like, there was zero part of me who felt like I wanted to write the owners and be like, you lied. This isn't what and Airbnb explicitly asks this at the end. They're like, was it represented appropriately? And it did not rise to the occasion where I felt like I would say it was misrepresented. So I just want to be clear there.
Well, see, but I think that if they had gone the other way, if they had not failed to make a disclosure and not said, well, there's a little bit of road noise, if they had had a whole section, like, here's why you'll hate this. You will hate this if you can't stand any road noise because there is occasional traffic that comes by. Right. It gives you the opportunity to go, well, I'm not that persnickety. I wouldn't mind that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's a way you could have taken it that I think, because if it were me, I've spent a little bit of time as part of a team that did events for people. And I just know how much other people get irritated by things that I don't. So I'm not always a good judge of people getting upset about like the temperature's too hot, too cold, is the seat too hard, too like just all the different things. Like, is the food exactly what I need it to be? I'm always just like, whatever, just it's food. Who cares? Like, so I would just be, if it were me hosting the house, I would want to get in front of those things, I guess, maybe. But here's the other thing they didn't mention until you actually get there. And this one I also thought was like a funny thing to leave out, because it would have made me want to go even more, is apparently there's a neighborhood bear.
Really?
Bear family, I should say. And I am deeply disappointed that we did not see the neighborhood bear, because when I was reading through the some of the other things that like people had left, apparently everyone else who stays there sees the bear or the bear family, depending on the time of year, like multiple times, and we did not see the bear once. There were very explicit instructions about where to put the trash and where not to leave food, not in the car.
Don't play with the big fuzzy dogs.
Yeah. Yes. Don't leave your small pet out on the porch. So we did not see the bear. There was this tiny part of me who was like, I wonder if I left some like nuts and berries on it.
Yeah.
But that seemed like a very bad idea. So
that's a very bad idea.
Very bad idea. But apparently Asheville is just like teeming with black bears. And if you actually look up Asheville Town Mountain Road, there are videos on YouTube of like the bears walking all around. But again, I thought it was sort of a missed opportunity first of all, but for the opposite reason, but to your point, if someone is super freaked out by the possibility of there being a bear in the area, and they wouldn't find out until they get there. Like if somebody would be so paranoid that a bear was going to crash through the window or whatever, that then I would want them to know that in advance. But for me, it was the other way around. The fact that there was even the possibility that the neighborhood bear might wander by and we get to see the cubs or whatever, like that was a huge uptick, but also not mentioned. So,
well, once again, there are ways to manage that expectation. So for example, all they had to do is name the bear. If they just said, so you might see Baxter, and Baxter has a family, and all of a sudden it's like, it's not a huge carnivore danger floof.
Right.
It's Baxter.
Did you say carnivore danger floof?
Yes, I did. I said carnivore danger floof.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's the translation of a literal Latin term for the species.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people think it's like Ursus or Ursinus, but it's not. It's carnivore danger floof.
Perfect.
But yeah, so again, you can still make a disclosure while playing to people's sensibilities, so that the disclosure is factual, but the wording is emotional. The wording actually goes to their and to elicit the emotion you want. Just like, and we've talked about this before with the job. Here's why you'll hate this job. What I want people to do is think about it. I want it to be informative, but I want them to go, no, I would not.
Yeah. Or I don't like that.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
I mean, that, and then they leave.
I think I've mentioned this before. I have a friend who, small organization. So you could get away with this. I mean, this doesn't work for everyone everywhere, but she intentionally doesn't have super descriptive job descriptions. That was redundant, but like super detailed, itemized job descriptions, because she said, look, we're in like a founder startup kind of zone. And it's a little bit like everyone jump in. And if someone is a person who needs their role extremely well defined and laid out in a step-by-step way, this ain't the place for you. It's like a build the plane as you fly it kind of organization, and will be for the foreseeable future. So if that is uncomfortable, and they've had those people, they've had people who like, okay, am I supposed to do this? What am I supposed to do? Is that my job? Can I do that? And she's like, I can't be that kind of manager. And so we really want to weed out those people who will feel uncomfortable without an exactingly sketched out work zone. And so it feels, I hear you. It's like making it clear, and then letting people choose for themselves whether that's something they want or don't want.
Yeah, and the danger, from the other side, the danger of a super detailed job description is that, especially in a small organization or a very versatile or nimble organization, is that you need this person to do something and they're like, well, that's not my job. That's what the nightmare is. But I find that a lot of companies who shy away from job descriptions because they're worried about somebody saying that's not my job and refusing to do something.
Yeah,
I find that to be like urban legend, like the razor blades and apples on Halloween.
Yep.
It's a scare tactic,
and a super insulting one at that.
Yeah,
like it just assumes the worst out of somebody, that they're like, oh no, that's not my job.
But what I think is fair, and what I think is even for smaller, more nimble, startup, whatever organizations, is to say, yes, you might be called on to wear a number of hats. However,
this is the hat we expect you to handle.
No, these are the critical aspects. Yeah. At least for right now, the reason that we decided to look for an addition to our team is because these are at least the critical aspects we need somebody to handle. Mm-hmm. You might have to be, bottle washer and do whatever else that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. But you're starting with the fact that we need graphic design, or we need, office management and accounting, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. And I think the other, we've talked before in other episodes about the role of values, that if values are well defined, somebody can decide whether or not it's the right place for them. And while not specifically values, it occurred to me while I was there, for instance, I was trying to record a song that I finally was able to get this F chord that I can't, that I have not been able to play an F on the guitar. And so I wanted to record it for my bandmate, John, who's been highly supportive in helping me to learn guitar. As sort of like, look, I can finally play this little section of a song. And 2 times I tried to record it, like right in the middle of it, was like, a car goes by, which is fine. I mean, I'm only sending it to him. But it occurred to me that had we not recorded ahead of time, and had I felt comfortable relying on the Wi-Fi, which was something that I already knew that I wasn't going to plan anything for that week, that I would have to rely on the Wi-Fi, because I knew that would be an unknown. Even though it says it has Wi-Fi, that doesn't mean it's respectable Wi-Fi. So I didn't plan that. But if we had, it would have been a problem, because either I was inside where you couldn't hear the street noise. I would have had to have asked my entire family to be silent while we were recording, or, which is inane, or I would have been outside, and that would have been quite distracting. Similarly, if my kids were not teenagers who I can pretty much just allow to do their own thing and make good decisions. Like if I had toddlers and then got there and found out there was a bear, I would have felt differently, because keeping not that I would just let my toddlers roam in the area, but my need to make sure they were watched I would have been more anxious about there being a bear. Whereas my kids are old enough to know how to handle that situation. And so I just thought it was, those are things that had I known, I might have cared more about given my situation. I can think up scenarios where the amount that I value those things would be affected and I would have wanted to know. As it is, it didn't pan out that way and it's fine, but it just raised an interesting question to me about somewhere in the zone of like truth in advertising and transparency.
Well, I think that what was missing was enough information against which you could apply your priorities and see if this is a fit. So your priority, for example, could have been to record a podcast. And you would have needed enough information to know that, you know what, this is not the right environment because there's traffic noise. Or your priority could have been that your toddlers would be allowed to run around and climb trees and do whatever they wanted to do outside and enjoy a vacation. But because of Baxter and family, the bears are wandering around, or the possibility of bears would make you choose something different. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't necessarily that they had to put enough information to scare you off, but by not putting anything, they didn't allow you to apply your priorities to see if it was a fit. And that's, I think, where the gap is.
So I sort of say I totally agree. And here's the part I don't agree with. It's just sort of like a mix of things. So I agree with that. But what also occurred to me is it is not the host's job to think of every possible scenario that like is that host supposed to anticipate that somebody might want to come in and record a broadcast? Like that's like outside versus like letting you know about something basic that has to do with safety or sleeping. Like there's a core of things that when it comes to truth in advertising, like if I got there and there were no beds with an Airbnb, that would be super problematic because that's its core thing.
Right, but I think the host doesn't have a responsibility to go, I wonder if they have a podcast. But I do think that the host would think, a lot of people coming up to this mountain Airbnb might really value peace and quiet. It's kind of like the scene, this is really dated, but the scene in My Cousin Vinny, where he goes out to the cabin and he's like, at first he goes to a series of motels and there's a train that comes through at 2 a.m. and wakes him up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think that there is a responsibility on the part of the host or the owner or the employer to not to think of every scenario, but to think of the most compelling reasons why people would come here, or the impressions people are likely to get when they read the advertisement before coming in, and to address anything that touches on those things.
Yeah, that seems fair. That seems fair, because there were other things that, they're just different things. Like some people care about what kind of coffee maker you have or don't have, and that is a top-notch. This would be ruined for me if this is the case. And not everybody does, and there are other things like that people do and don't care about.
Right. But there's a balance, right? So exactly on that. If I know this might be perfect for me because I'm looking for peace and quiet. I want to be up in the mountains, et cetera. Except the one thing that I need is my gourmet coffee. Mm-hmm. Then there's a tipping point, right? Where that's incumbent upon me. Mm-hmm. To figure out if I know that I'm going to a mountain environment and my son is extremely allergic to 5,000 different kinds of plants. Well, I'm going to notice that there are plants. So it's incumbent upon me to
ask, like, if I was going to record a podcast, and I said, is there a quiet enough place that I could, to ask that question because it's outside. That's an interesting, and it actually ties back to the episode we did 2 weeks ago about why I had trouble with the, the prioritization, like the things we cared about most and what would be problematic and what wouldn't. And as we had narrowed those down, neither of those things were on my list of like being able to record a podcast wasn't super important. Certainly like must have wildlife family that swings by occasionally wasn't on my list. So it's not like I felt let down by not noticing that thing. I was like, there was a tiny bit of like about the sound sometimes, but I get used to it really quickly. So it was fine. But yeah, I think
on the wildlife thing, when a couple of years ago, when we went down to North Carolina to the Outer Banks, and we stayed on the 4x4 beaches in wild horse country in a home that's located in wild horse estates. Okay. Now, for us, we just like
where are the horses I was promised?
Yes, that's exactly right. At a certain point, I have the right to expect that the horses are not an extinct species that haven't been seen there for a century.
Right.
I have the right to expect exactly what we got, which is, you wake up in the morning, you go out your front door, and there are a bunch of horses standing on your front yard.
Right, right. Well, this was our running joke all week. Is every morning when I was walking around, I would walk around, and at some point, and like the kids got really tired of this, but I thought it was very funny. At some point, at least once a day, I would scream out into the house, "I was promised bears!" It's
really fast. You could have come, for example, prepared with your own sign that said, honey, HUNNY, and maybe that attracts them, because maybe you never know. You haven't seen it. It might be a cartoon bear.
It could be a cartoon bear. It could be a cartoon. But actually, that's the point. I wasn't promised bears. No one promised me bears, and yet I was disappointed that when I found out that there might be bears, which I think is, to not be silly, but I think that is the conundrum of what you say and don't say. Like if they made a big deal about there being bears and then there weren't bears and people came for the bears, then they'd be disappointed. If they don't mention the bears, this is the challenges of, to your original point, like you don't want to scare people off unnecessarily and make something, especially if they're going to assume that if you mentioned it at all, that it's, way, way, way worse. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he says whatever people admit to doing, like if they're like, they're like, do you drink alcohol? Yes. How many days a week? 2. He goes, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so 5. Like, and how many drinks do you have? 2. All right, so 7. Like, he's like, some people are being honest, but most people are going to give you like a honed down version, like shaved off the edges.
That's exactly right. That's my point about the disclosure. Some traffic noise to me means that you've constructed your house in a median strip.
Fair point. Fair point.
So, but there are certain places where you have to actually manage the expectations. So like if your company is giving whale watching tours, you've got to say there may not be whales. We may not see whales.
Yes. Yeah, we cannot promise. You are not promised whales.
You are not promised whales. Whales are beyond our control to promise. But I do think that the owners of this Airbnb had to, and maybe they did, really hone in on what is the appeal. Why would somebody stop at their Airbnb listing and think, let me look further because this might be the place? And if that answer, and I suspect it is, might one of the answers might be, well, because it's peace and quiet in the middle of nowhere, because that's what the pictures show, then I do think that it's incumbent upon you to go, you know what? It is.
And
however, you're not hiking 4 miles to get there. There's somewhere in the middle of this nowhere that you're going to have to address. And that's with any job, with any RFP, with anything. I think that you have to try and get into the mind of the person who's reading it, of your core audience, and think what impression they may be left with and determine, are they bound to be disappointed? Is it inevitable? Or is there a really high chance they're going to be disappointed? And if so, I have to address that. Or is what I'm showing them going to align?
Yeah, and I think that I suspect that this is another blind spot, and probably why it's useful to expand your what's the word I want? Your awareness, because if you're from there and you like, there's no expectation that if you're like, having been there now, there's probably well, that's not entirely true, but if you're 4, 5, 7 miles outside of Asheville, you're not the middle of nowhere. You're just not. So there being any expectation, like I could see me owning that house and being like, why would you think that there would be why do I have to even say that? That's not possible at this space or something, because that's your impression from inside your experience of that space. But if you can step outside of it to someone who doesn't have that expectation because they've never been there and they're just looking at the information that you're showing them, which is the set of pictures and whatever. And I will say one other thing is I read like the first 2 reviews, but I didn't read like 8 reviews, and like 6 reviews down, someone else did mention the road. They're like, a little bit of a noisy road, not a huge deal. Couldn't hear it inside the house, but wasn't expecting it. I didn't read that far, so I didn't see it. But if I were the owner, once I got a review about something like that, I may have actually been like, oh, I never even occurred to me that someone would have that expectation. So I should probably mention that. I think of you all the time when you say that when somebody comes to you for a contract. The one time I came to you and about a potential partner agreement, you always start with that. What would make this go south? What are the things that's not the question you ask, but like what would make this? It's the
regret question. What would make you so regret having entered into this agreement that you wish you could turn back the clock and never do it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so that's where I think that the owner really has an obligation to think about the regret question. And if not answer it directly, then at least give the reader enough information to answer it for themselves.
Or to make sure I see a bear. One or the other. Or to
make sure you see a bear.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.